with you if we share this with the rest of the writers in the state. And of course, Steve and Rosie are going to join us for our convention and give a little bit different program in October. So they'll be, I think, emphasizing more of, I can't remember, you may have to refresh my memory about what your program is going to be about in October. But so we're going to be seeing more of Steve and Rosie. But today I think they're going to be talking to us about co-authoring. And I don't know if any of you besides me have even ventured into this murky area of co-authoring and all the pitfalls that are involved here. But I think you've got to be pretty good friends because it could end up on the opposite side of friendship if you're not careful when you're co-authoring. But before we start this with Steve and Rosie, I have to kind of do a true confession about the subject of Steve and Rosie's book. In terms of my time and place in the Vietnam era, I was on a college campus when Steve was serving in the Vietnam War, as was Rosie, I understand. Rosie, you went to K-State or KU? K-State. Mm-hmm. K-State. So while Steve was fighting in the jungles of Vietnam, Rosie was at K-State, I was at Mizzou. I got to participate in a lot of the campus protests. I was kind of blindly led along, not really into the philosophy of the anti-war protests. I never accused any of my friends who served in the war of being baby killers, but I sure heard a lot about that. And, you know, I certainly felt guilty later on as I watched the news about the vets that came home and were just totally ostracized. And now that I am married to a veteran, you know, I know the effects of PTSD and how our veterans suffer so much from that and continue to suffer from the untold stories. I know you're probably not going to get into much of that today, Steve, but I certainly do sympathize with that and with the, you know, unwitting role that a lot of us played in that years ago. So I am anxious to hear what you have to say about how we as authors, what we can avoid when we consider co-authoring. So with that being said, I'm going to adjust this to the speaker view so that we can have Steve and Rosie take it away. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you for inviting us to your group today. And we do have a few things that we'd like to share about co-authoring, and not only from the book that we did together, 9 Pairs of Boots in Vietnam, but also for the first book that I co-authored called Running Away and Finding Home. And so I thought I'd give a little bit of background. Before I was asked to co-author a book by an acquaintance who was a friend of a friend, I had contributed to 4 books. I had written one on my own. I had written a children's book. The one I wrote on my own was traditional publishing. Then I had written a children's book. And so I was approached by this gentleman to help him write his book because he has an amazing story to tell, but he was a motivational speaker and not a writer. And so I thought, wow, this is a gripping story of a Korean War veteran, and it was interesting, and I'd heard him speak, and I thought it was going to be a challenging project, but I kind of thought, you know, this is going to be a piece of cake. This is going to be easy. And so I did a little research, but I obviously didn't really do enough research. And so were some things that I wished I would have known before I dove into this murky area of co-authoring. So what we decided to do today is we're basing our talk on an article that is by Tucker Max, and Tucker is the co-founder of Scribe. He's a 4 times New York Times bestselling author. And what I found when he was writing his article on how to co-author a book and his 8 tips to consider, it was just like right down the line. Like his top 3 out of those 8, which is probably all we're going to get to today, if that, were just exactly what I would say would be my top 3 tips. And so Anne is going to, I think, put into our notes today the links to that article, so you'll have that.
I think I already did. It's in the chat section. Yes.
Yeah, I don't have the chat up there. I need to get it up there so I can say that. So anyway, that is what I'm working off of. And so there's kind of 2 aspects to his article. One was, do you really want to do this? Have you really thought through some of the questions that you need to be asking before you agree to co-author with someone else? Because as an author, as you know, there's a lot of decision making that goes on. Things like how many chapters, what are you going to do with the book once it's done? Are you going to go, how are you going to get it published? What's going to be the title? What about the cover? In my case, the co-author and his spouse chose a cover that wasn't my first choice. Matter of fact, I didn't really like it that well, but it was a memoir and it was his memoir. So I deferred to that. And I found myself a lot of times in a situation where, if I was doing it myself and if I was making a decision, I would go one way. But since there's 2 people and maybe even more than 2 people involved, it got to be kind of interesting along the way. Things like decisions about the financial side of things, decisions about the marketing side of things, the launch, the events. There's so many different things to think about that I may have a certain way of doing something that might be different than the co-author might. In deciding whether co-authoring is right for you, I think one of the first things you need to ask is, are you prepared to share the decision making? And the article was interesting because it said, co-authoring may not be like a marriage. After all, you're not signing on for life, but it is like a serious committed relationship. Well, so in the one book I co-authored was with a friend, and the other was a marriage situation. And so there were some differences there that we'll address as we go along as well. But so one of the things I thought about was whoever said, don't do business with friends or family. And yet we all know people that have family businesses and they do make it work. And it's not to say that it can't be done, but it is to say that you really need to weigh out all of the potential issues that might come. And, if you decide that you're going to do this and you realize like halfway through that you really have a different idea of where this book is going, then you can really end up in difficult situations. There's a lot of tension that could happen when expectations are not met. Now that for me, I know I had some expectations that weren't met. My first co-author had some expectations that weren't met. And so the thing that I pulled out of this article that I thought was like the most important thing that Tucker Max said was, you need to be super clear on high-level decisions before you start the book. And so part of that is what decisions are we talking about? Some of the things I talked about earlier and they're referenced in the article. So, he goes on to talk about some things like positioning your book and target audiences and some of those kinds of things that I think probably many of you are familiar with already. But one of the things I thought was interesting, he said, is important to outline the book before you really enter into an agreement to co-author the book, because that whole thing of outlining the book, you are going to be able to probably discover if you have some fundamental differences in how you want the book to look. And so I thought that was a good piece of advice there, is to get that outline going, create the table of contents. Oops, I lost my, oh, there it is, it's back. And in the article, there is an outline template that you can download and print off if that's something that might be helpful for you. The other thing about co-authoring is the different skill sets that each brings to the table. So sometimes one person's stronger in the writing skills side of it. The other person might be stronger in the marketing side of it. The problem comes in sometimes if you're both strong in the same area. And I know that most authors are pretty independent thinkers. I'm not saying that we're controlling, but sometimes we can be controlling. And so if you have two people that come in with really strong opinions, maybe based on their experience, then somehow you have to work through those issues. And I am so thankful that in that first situation that we were able to get to the finish line with relationships intact and that kind of thing. But I'm telling you, it stretched me in ways I did not even know I needed to be stretched in. And so that's some of the things that we'll talk about as we go into these little tips that we're gonna deal with. So, so after I co-authored the Running Away and Finding Home book with Tommy Webb, he's a Judge Tommy Webb. That also was interesting too, in terms of the kind of legal aspects of everything. But after that, I was toward the end of that project, and I was pretty exhausted through that. And then this guy, what'd you do?
Well, I guess I have to set up the situation here, and that is, if we're going to co-author a book, you need to be pretty well unified. And we've been married now for over 50 years. And for all of these 50 years, she has wanted me to write. And the real rub here between us is that she really loves to write. And you need to know that I really hate to write. In fact, in my book, I talk about, I got in trouble for not writing home. I was in the jungle almost the whole time. My mom was just absolutely terrified. And so I couldn't, number one, we were advised not to write home and tell about all the things we're doing. Some of them were classified missions. And so I couldn't write about that. Well, I didn't want to write about the actual war situation to scare my mom to death. So what do I write about? Well, there's another green tree over there. And, plus the fact that I didn't like to write anyway. And we got resupplied with letters every 5 days. And so if you missed a mail call, which in the jungle, they'd come out with helicopters and give you the mail, and you take your mail and put on and it heads home. Well, if you missed one, then it would be 10 days before the mail started going home. And if you missed two, that's 15, not to mention how much time it takes to travel. And anyway, to make that story short, my mom thought I was laying in a hospital or something because I had a lot of days go by that I didn't write. And so she contacted the Red Cross. Red Cross contacted Red Cross Overseas. Red Cross Overseas contacted my battalion commander, and my battalion commander contacted my company commander while we were in the jungle. And we were walking across this mountain ridge, and we stopped. And so we turned around for security. And I noticed the captain walking back, and I told boy, he looks mad. Somebody's going to get their butt chewed. Well, within earshot, I heard him say, "Where's Williams?" And I went, "Sir." And he said, "Your mommy just got my butt chewed." And anyway, he said, "A chopper is coming in 30 minutes and your letter will be on it." So they sent a helicopter just for my letter. Anyway, that's the story. Unfortunately, I still don't like to write. And part of my background is I was a probation officer for 31 years. And one of the main jobs that I did for 31 years was write court reports. And of course, they were technical, and you had to do this and you had to do home visits and research. And so I have no idea how many reports I wrote over 31 years, several thousand probably. And that may have also contributed to me not wanting to write. But as I'm observing Rosie writing this book and the struggles that she had and many things that didn't make it into the book, I helped, I kind of let her bounce things off of my head, and I'd give her ideas and even a suggestion for a title and all. Well, then my son, who's out in California, they got a late start on having kids. And so the kids are really young, my grandkids. And he said, "Dad, before you die, I want you to get your stories in writing." And that was like twisting my arm, because I love to tell stories. That's something that's a strong point of mine. But then to say he wants me to put them down in writing, I'm going, oh, nuts. Now I've got to write. But as I watched Rosie, I thought we could do a better job as far as the flow, the ease of it. She struggled with a lot of things, even though she's also struggled with me over 50 years of wanting me to write, and I didn't want to. But we began I decided, because of my son twisting my arm, yeah, I think it was time. So I told her it's time. And to my surprise, because of her last struggling book, she was absolutely excited about writing my memoirs. And of course, she was along for the ride as well. So
Yeah, it's one of those things where you go, I'm never going to do this again. And 5 minutes later, you're signing up to do it again.
yeah,
But, the number one tip in setting clear expectations for each other. And that was true both in the book that I did with Tommy and the book that we did together. He says, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't assume the other person can read your mind. Be clear, be straightforward, and be explicit. So like in the part where you can't read each other's mind, even though you've been married 50 years. What would happen when we started out this process, and this was some years ago, is that Steve would tell me his story. I would go write it, and get it like what I thought was just stellar. And then I would let him read it, and he would go, "That's not it. That's not how it happened. That's not my voice." I mean, so then I'd get my feelings hurt, and then I'd pull back. And so I had pulled back really for a number of years, and I'm going down my writing pathway and my journey. And so I was surprised really when he said, "I think I'm finally ready to write my story." But what changed?
well, part of it was watching how she struggled with somebody else. I would think it was a little easier with me, but maybe not. But
Lots easier.
But we could talk, and we've always done well at communicating. But the idea of, especially years ago, watching her write one of my stories, and it sounded like a woman told it, and I'm going, that it doesn't have the aroma of a warrior. If I can, that doesn't make sense maybe, but that's just how it felt to me. And then to observe that, and then go, I had to realize that I'm going to tell my stories again, but I've got to be willing to let go of it and let her take some of it. Now she's gifted in, editing, and they say that women have many more words they use than men do. So I think that made the story better with her words that I probably wouldn't have used, except that then I was able to read it and get the feel of it, and also relinquish some of the power over it or ownership of it, to be able to tell the story the way it ought to be told. And we began a process of going and understanding. I had the right to veto whatever she'd come up with, but a lot of the story is my stories in many ways, and yet she also was able to add her perspective of it, which made it go better, I think. And
Yeah, we in the book we tag teamed. Like I would
Yeah.
tell the story of my perspective being a college student and the protest going on the campus while he's, you know, who knows where over there in Vietnam, at one point Cambodia, and listening on the news at you know, every night. And so yeah, it was it was like there was something that really changed, I think, with Steve. And I think that just the experience of the first co-authoring situation was the I don't know, stimulus, impetus for us doing his book. And one of the things that I tell on him, he when his younger years, he used to pour concrete with his dad. And so we had to get past this thing of once that I would, let's say I would come up with an idea about one of his stories. So I would get started and I'd hand the computer to him. And then he would say, well, that's not exact. I said, it's not in concrete. It's fluid. You can change the whole thing if you want. And I had to keep going back to, you have to be comfortable with this. This can't just be my take on it. You can throw that out and you can put your take on it. And so I think by giving each other the permission, and I think this would go with any co-author, is giving each other the permission to go back and forth. I did have also an article I printed off, and it was co-authoring a book with a friend. And it was these two ladies that were longtime friends, and they decided they were going to write a book about how to deal with their adult daughters. And so they had all these ideas and things were going great. But when it came time to actually start writing, one of them was a real slow, careful writer. And then she had all this stuff going on in her family and she couldn't keep up with the deadlines. And the other lady had fewer demands on her time and she was quick. She was like sending this lady all this stuff. So then that lady was just overwhelmed with all this stuff, you know. And it said Sandy sent Nan long drafts of text and she'd have to wait days or even frustrating weeks for a response. Nan was overwhelmed by the quantity of material and the avalanche of what I can't even say the word adjectives. She whittled them down, added her ideas, made a shapelier draft, and returned it to Sandy, who felt like the juice was gone from her exuberant excess. So that's a really good one. You can look it up. It's under Writer's Digest, and it's under co-authoring a book with a friend. But to me, I could relate to some of these things that they were saying, and because they both said that there were times, you know, where even though they didn't really have a outright argument or quarrel, they were just about ready to. They were just stretched to their limit because they both came at it from different angles, and those angles a lot of times just clashed in terms of their expectations again. So
let me add too that
interesting.
There was another part that it was a learning process for me in that, you know, I spoke at schools and churches and so forth, telling my stories. And I learned, which I had to relearn in doing the book, is that many times when I spoke, you would see people's eyes glaze over because they didn't understand. And the truth is, I can only tell, I can tell my stories, but realize they will only grasp a percentage of it as far as understanding it. There's so many things that are so foreign to people who've never been in that kind of situation that I had to back off a little bit and relax or chill and go, you know, I could try to explain it as best as possible. And then she also have helped me in communicating some of this stuff, even though there's a lot of my stories that I know that if you weren't there, you won't get it. And so it's kind of a giving up of some of that ownership of those stories that I want to be so exact. And, you know, and even if it's exactly how it happened and people don't get it, then it's kind of a waste of energy. So you have to work with that, try to put it down on paper the right way where people can grasp some of it.
Yeah, and in the presentation that we're going to do in the fall, I'm thinking, if I had this right, Anne, that your overall theme has to do with kind of writing from emotion and that kind of whole thing. And so
Writing
we'll be
through difficulty.
through difficulty.
Yeah.
So we'll be talking more about that in specifically in terms of post-traumatic stress, and how just the very process of writing dredged up a lot of emotions, and how that actually affected him when it was time for him to stop writing and go up to the barn.
I could be typing for hours, and then all of a sudden I tell her, I got to stop. I got to go do some woodworking or weld on something or do something to allow my mind to relax and chill. And the other thing is, it's almost like running a marathon. You can only go so far before you hit the wall. At least for me, I admire people who tell me, when they get on a roll, man, they can just write for hours. And I'm going, that is awesome for you, but it's not for me. So I can do what I can. I got to take a break, and then I kind of get recharged and I can go the next step.
So the advantage of being married 50 years is that I know just how far I can push him. And then I know when it's time to give him some needed space. But one of the things I did want to address, and I know time is getting away here from us, and we're still on point number one. I knew this was going to happen, but the importance of having written agreement. And another link that is in the information is lead you to an author collaboration agreement that you can print off free. And another part of that is an amendment to the author collaboration agreement, which, had I signed one of those to start with, I know I'd had to have the amendment, because things change and you don't realize what's going to happen until you get 3/4 of the way done with the book. And I'll give you an example of that. But then there's another link for just a co-author contract, and it's a little more descriptive in there. And I thought they were both really good. And I did actually, I pulled together a contract before I started the first co-authoring experience, because I'd been in business. I knew that was important. But my co-author, who was a judge, retired judge, didn't really want to sign it. He didn't really think it was necessary. I think he just thought, oh, we'll work through this. It won't be. And inside I'm like going, oh, we should have something in writing. But I let it slide. It was one of those deals where I wasn't explicit. I wasn't firm. And then it kind of created waves down the line a little bit. So that is really, really important. I don't care if you've been friends 25 years, that's all the more reason to have it spelled out for both of your own protection, and to clarify ahead of time what the expectations are. But so what happened then in that first situation is, because I started out really being hired as a ghostwriter. And so then it went from a ghostwriter and to a co-author at his request. And I'm like, oh, okay, we can turn the corner and we can do that. And the truth was, I really didn't know what I was doing. I was trying to do research and figure out, the difference between how that looks. But there's a lot of differences between a ghostwriter and a co-author, and it affects things like the roles. What are your roles? How are the finances going to be handled? How does that affect timelines? There's a lot of different things there. And the other thing was then that my first co-author brought in his daughter toward the end, and that was she really is an amazing, talented writer, but as another co-author. So now we have another co-author, and the roles became even more confused than they were before, in terms of things like just as simple as the technical side of things, and people having different computer programs when it came to editing. And then also bringing in more editors, like a friend of the family who was a retired English teacher, bless her heart. And I do appreciate the time that she spent but she didn't, she wasn't up to speed on some of the current, practices. And so she would change things that I'd have to go back and rechange. But also there was just, there was just a lot of technical things that came down the pike. And so it was like dominoes that started just like hitting the ground. And so I'm telling you, I'm just amazed that we got to the finish line on that. But I look back on it now as a positive learning experience. And I wouldn't even be able to talk to you guys today if it wasn't for that. So, but the second point then, and we're not going to get to point 3, but the second point is lose your ego, lose the ego. And this was a deal of when you agree to co-author a book, the book isn't yours anymore, and it belongs to both of you. So Steve and I, like one day I was telling him, I said, yeah, people are always going, yeah, I want a copy of Steve's book. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, I got to lose the ego. I mean, I did a lot of work on that book, but it's kind of like it's Steve's book. And so I'm like, okay, it's Steve's book. And then one day, tell him what happened.
We had the opposite effect. I had a dear friend that I've known for many years, and he just assumed that Rosie's the writer and I didn't do anything. And he came and right there in front of me, he went to Rosie and said, I really appreciated your book. And I'm going, in my chopped liver, I did do some of it. And it was amazing that people will make assumptions. And that's the other thing, you have to be ready that some people will say things that they, again, don't have a clue as to what was really happening. Of course, I'm sure you guys know too, many people think that when you are writing books, you're going to get wealthy because you're an author. And we haven't realized that, so there's
Not
a lot
sure
of
anybody does.
yeah. And, there's a lot of misunderstanding. And so that's, like Rosie saying, lose the ego. That's kind of not fair. But the other thing is, I've heard of maybe you've heard of a saying I've heard years ago that somebody said, there's no limit to what God can do if you don't care who gets the credit. And that's where you kind of let go and let the book stand.
Yeah, and that was kind of important to us because our books are faith-based books. And so it's like, you felt like I'm really being tested here. Maybe somebody's really watching me and I really need to just suck it up sometimes and just also realize that, my ego does need to be, fine-tuned. I do need to back down off of that. One of the things, a couple of other quotes. One was, I saw this online and I couldn't find the source, but it says, don't be upset if somebody steals your stuff, be upset if they don't. And I have thought about that a lot because it's like, it's another step in freeing you up to hold your work loosely. You know what your ideas are, where you're going with it. If somebody else takes something and goes off on it, it's like more power to them. That's kind of that's a compliment. And so when I saw that, it just kind of switched something in my head to look at things. If somebody, kind of take an idea and run off with it or something like that. I also had a deal where, I don't know if I said this or not, where a lady asked if I had edited the book. Did I say that yet? So a lady came up to me and she goes, yeah, I read your book. And so I just wondered, did you have anybody edit that? And I'm just like going, I really wanted to punch her in the face, but I did not punch her in the face. But I went, yeah, we had it edited numerous times. I've already told you, we had the English teacher, we had the family members, we had the professional editor that we had originally hired, who should have had that all in her court. We had a lot of editing. And she said, well, I found 13 errors in the book. And I'm like, oh God, help me. So anyway, I went home and I thought about that. And I mentioned it to a writer friend in Kansas City, and she goes, yeah, you may want to take a look at that. And so it's like, lose the ego, realize that it's not a personal attack on you. It's you know, you miss some things
Yeah.
as much as you try. And I know you guys know this on the editing, as much as you do backflips, there's going to be some things you miss. And some of them are going to be little tiny things and some of them are bigger. And
That's where you had to get to the point and realize that was her strong point.
that
You
was
know?
her strong point. She's a detail person. I'm not a detail person when it comes to that. I'm more big picture content and all this other, but I'm not, like, when it gets to that fine detail stuff, it's not my strength. And to be able to go from being upset with her for bringing that up to the next week thanking her for bringing that up, because we just had it reprinted and we were able to correct all of those 13 things. And guess what? I found about 13 more. So the next printing is going to be, we'll be more proud of it, because we'll go, okay, this has really been edited now. But so anyway, that's just some personal examples of, you know, the need to lose that ego, and to, you know, one of the things they said in here is that if you have to resist the urge to be forceful or aggressive, you have to listen to each other and find a way to compromise or come to an agreement. And so I think that, even though co-authoring can be dicey, at the end of the day, when the book's published, you're going, wow, this is awesome, that, you know, that a message that was originally intended to get out there to help people really did get out there, and hopefully is helping people. But one thing I sent at the 9th hour, I sent over to Ann, I said, if I wrote a book on co-authoring, if we wrote a book on co-authoring, what would the title be? Would it be 1, The Joy of Co-authoring? 2, Think Twice Before You Co-author? Or 3, How to Co-author a Book in 3 Easy Steps? Well, I was going to, if we had time, I would have got some suggestions from you guys, but the answer is none of the above, because we won't be writing a book on that. So.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve and Rosie. That was awesome. Are there any questions for Steve and Rosie?